Okay, let's go ahead and get started then. So hello everyone and welcome to Health and Wellness on the Forefront, the rising demand for Fitwel. My name is Sonia Hashi and I'm a consultant at Gobi, the ESG platform, and I work primarily with LEED and Fitwel certifications for commercial real estate. In today's webinar, we will explore improving ESG performance with Fitwel. We'll look specifically at insights into investor demand for health and wellness, an introduction to the Fitwel Viral Response Module, best practices and strategies, a case study, incorporating Fitwel into portfolio level ESG reporting, and much more. And we're very glad to be joined by Fitwel and Lendlease for today's webinar. But before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, the webinar is being recorded. The recording and slide deck will be distributed to everyone after the session. And second, the webinar should run for about 45 minutes. We'll save 5 to 10 minutes or so for questions at the end. If you have a question at any point during the webinar, you can submit it to the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions section. We'll attempt to answer as many questions as we can, but if we don't get to all of them, members of our team can follow up after the webinar to provide any answers. So now that we've covered those, let's introduce today's speakers. Today we've got Zachary Flora. Zach is the Vice President of Market Growth at the Center for Active Design, operator of the Fitwel certification system. In this role, Zach is responsible for defining and executing Fitwel's growth and development as a global healthy building platform and certification system. Zach joined the Center for Active Design in April of 2018 to provide direct support to high-value users across the real estate industry. Over the last 3+ years, Zach has cultivated a deep understanding of Fitwel's users, products, and programs. Zach holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Delaware in Health and Behavior Sciences and a Master of Arts in Urban Planning from Georgetown University. We also have Owen Hill with us here today. Owen is a development manager at Lendlease, a globally integrated real estate and investment group with core expertise in shaping cities and creating strong and connected communities. Owen is responsible for the daily management, supervision, coordination, and execution of urban regeneration development projects in Chicago, with a focus on financial analysis and sustainability. He's also responsible for investor relations, contract management, project sales and leasing, marketing, and budgeting. Prior to joining Lendlease, he was a senior associate at Duff & Phelps in the real estate advisory practice. So with all of that, we can go ahead and get started. Take it away, Zach.
Thanks, Sonia, and thanks everyone for joining today. It's been a while since I was on my last webinar with Gobi, and thank you for having me back. So as Sonia mentioned, today I want to go over a little bit about Fitwel and the Center for Active Design. I also like to go over some things that are new this year, some reports we published, some new scorecards, and also spend a little bit of time talking about our growth over the last year or so, and some things that kind of make Fitwel unique. Before we get started on Fitwel, though, I'd like to just briefly kind of level set with everyone about the Center for Active Design, the organization who actually operates and manages the Fitwel certification system. The Center for Active Design, or CFAD, is an international nonprofit that's been around for about 10+ years. It works to kind of advance and facilitate healthy communities and resilient communities and improve quality of life. And we got our start out of former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg's administration. He launched a really transformative publication in 2010 called the Active Design Guidelines. That was the first time we actually took public health research and translated it into solutions for cities and the real estate and design community to create healthier promoting places and spaces, whether it be streets or buildings or parks. If I can put into one sentence, what CFAD does is that we translate research into practice, and we do that through a variety of programs. And I think that, oh, there we go. And I think that Fitwel is probably our flagship program that we have available to us. And Fitwel is a healthy building certification that looks to optimize buildings to support the health and well-being of occupants. And we do that through a series of kind of operational management and design strategies. Fitwel launched in March of 2017 and has really seen some rapid growth over the last 4+ years. And it's applicable to a wide variety of asset types and a wide variety of buildings globally. So excited to kind of walk you through its application and some of the things that make it unique in the marketplace. Fitwel was actually not designed by the Center for Design. It was actually created by the U.S. Center for Disease Control and the General Services Administration. So in 2010 and 2015, the CDC gathered some leading practitioners to actually look at a large body of research that connected the built environment to human health. And they actually looked at about 3,000 pieces of research. They came up with a scorecard for office buildings that could be used to help kind of, again, optimize kind of operations and design. At that point, they piloted it across about 100 buildings in the GSA portfolio, looking at those that are rural, urban, suburban, new construction, existing buildings, those that were historically designated, and looking at things like lab spaces, courthouse, and traditional office buildings to make sure that it was really calibrated correctly to be used kind of at scale across a variety of types, typologies, or asset types or occupant profiles. They then put out a competitive RFP for a company to actually bring Fitwel to marketplace, and the CDC chose CFAD as that organization. So since 2016, CFAD has been the sole operator of Fitwel and responsible for its third-party certification, its growth and development. I'd like to mention that the CDC is still our primary and kind of strategic research partner. They're involved in the continued growth and the continued gathering and analysis of research that supports the development of Fitwel and the growth of our scorecards and our modules. So just to kind of talk about the growth of Fitwel over the last 4 years, I wanted to share a few numbers for everybody on the call today. First is, we're global certification, so we have projects in about 50 countries and about 6,100 global users across our platform. As of earlier this month, we have about 1,000 projects that are certified or pending certification. So they've submitted for it. They're just going through the review process. Another 2,700 that are registered and kind of working towards that certification and using our platform to assess their buildings against the Fitwel standard. Last year alone, we saw 190% growth, which was really incredible. And that's growth in terms of the number of projects being registered. A fun fact about Fitwel is that since March of 2017, the real estate community has registered about 500,000 square feet each day on our platform. That's a number we're very proud of, and we're very proud to see the continued growth of our users across their portfolios and across the globe. Sorry, I'm just having a little trouble switching to the next slide. If you could help me, Chris. There we go. And I think that growth is attributed to a few things that make Fitwel incredibly unique. The first is that evidence base and the CDC. So having the CDC be our research partner, they're involved in all the research that goes behind Fitwel and really looks to kind of make sure that we are applying the rigor when we're creating these solutions and these new scorecards. Today, Fitwel sits on about 5,600 pieces of peer-reviewed research, and that really helps to make sure that all the strategies in Fitwel are backed by an evidence base, and that means that they're all proven to have an impact on human health and change behaviors within occupants of those spaces. The second thing that makes Fitwel incredibly unique is that there are no barriers to eligibility. So unlike other certifications that might be out there, there are no prerequisites to actually use Fitwel. That was really important for us to make sure that Fitwel could be used not just on kind of flagship buildings in downtown Chicago or midtown Manhattan. They can be used across your portfolio in existing assets and assets in suburban locations. It really allows you as an organization, the owner of the building, the real estate investor, to decide on which strategies are most important for your assets or your portfolio. And you can determine that based off occupant profile, location of the building, and local health concerns, budget, or a number of other kind of differentiating factors. Third is that Fitwel is easily scalable. So this was designed, again, not to be used on one building, but to be used across your portfolio. We truly believe at CFAD that health is kind of, equity is super important for health. So we don't want to just reserve for C-suite executives or those in the fanciest buildings downtown. We want to make sure that you're able to scale these solutions and these strategies across your portfolio. One, to have the greatest impact on the individuals within your offices or within your buildings, but also to make sure that you're able to utilize these strategies across ESG or sustainability initiatives so that you can truly get a sense of information and truly add these things as part of a larger program that can be used across any current assets or future assets that you might bring on board. That scalability is reflected in our cost as well. So an average Fitwel certification costs between $7,000 and $8,000 US, which means that companies can more rapidly apply Fitwel across multiple projects in a year instead of having to focus on one at a time. And then we have our online platform, which we'll get into in just a little bit. Thanks, Chris. Now, just to touch on the nuts and bolts of Fitwel, I'd like to walk through the certification process. It's a 6-step process for getting certified. Everything happens on our online platform, but the Fitwel platform allows companies to do 3 things really. One is to register and assess their projects against the Fitwel standard, to understand how they're performing today and how they can actually improve operations or design elements of the building to achieve Fitwel certification or improve their score or star rating. The second is the platform allows companies to actually move through the certification process, so move through all the documentation, the reviews, and actually get their certificate. And the third is that each step of the way, it allows Fitwel to it allows the organization to actually grab information and data points about how their buildings are performing. So Fitwel uses a lot of information, excuse me, to help understand and link the research behind each strategy to how the strategies are actually going to impact your occupant. So at each stage, the portal provides not only project management details, but also details about the actual impact you're having on occupants through the work that you're doing, whether that be indoor air quality testing, adding bicycle parking to buildings, or even adding some outdoor spaces or signage within your properties. And Fitwel uses a rating system of 1, 2, or 3 stars. So the entry point for Fitwel certification is achieving a score of 90 points. That'll be a 1-star Fitwel rating, and the highest and most rigorous is 3 stars. And similar to other certifications, there are plaques or decals you can get to put on the sides of your buildings and other marketing materials to communicate to tenants or residents or employees about your certification and what that means for them within the building. And I mentioned some of that data that's there and available for projects, whether they're doing the initial assessment or going through certification. And one thing that we do is we have 7 health impact categories. And what they really do is they link the research behind each strategy to the strategy's potential outcome. So some might be very familiar to you, things like promoting occupant safety or increasing physical activity. Others might be less familiar, things like instilling feelings of well-being, that's all around mental health and quality of life, or things like social equity through the built environment. But these data points are really important because, again, it allows you to understand not only what strategies you're implementing, but it allows you to take that information and tie it into some broader ESG initiatives or sustainability metrics. So when I look at users over the last year, one thing that we found is that a lot of our real estate companies or real estate investors and corporate occupiers are using Fitwel in the platform to actually grab some of this information to strengthen the S metrics around their ESG reporting and strengthen their disclosures that they're doing to benchmarking and rating systems like GRESB or others in the industry. So accessing this data helps them really understand how is their portfolio performing, but also allows them to plan investments in the future to say, if I want to focus on things like occupant safety or social equity, I can identify strategies that particularly hit those health impact categories and focus on those across my portfolio if certain themes are really important for what I'm looking at and what I'm planning to invest in. Next slide, please. And some of this information, thanks Chris, some of this information is also found in a report that came out this year. So this report, A New Investor Consensus, The Rising Demand for Healthy Buildings, actually came out in March of 2021. And we wanted to identify how COVID-19 had changed the perspective of the real estate industry in terms of their thinking of healthy buildings. So we issued a survey to a number of real estate investors and companies, and we found some really interesting insights into how COVID has changed their minds or elevated the importance of healthy buildings. And one theme that we found is that, prior to COVID, the interest in healthy buildings and the demand for it was certainly rising, but COVID-19 has really accelerated that demand being that so many more people, whether it be residents or employees or tenants or even investors, are much more aware of the link between health and the built environment. And they're aware that healthy buildings play a role in not only the performance of those portfolios, but also in the ability to attract and retain tenants and bring people back to the office space. There's a lot of really interesting findings in here. You can download this report from our website, fitwel.org. It's completely free. And it's really being used by a lot to understand where the market is now, but some really good insight and interviews within that publication. And kind of pivoting away from that, I wanted to touch on the nuts and bolts of Fitwel again, in case anyone out there is unsure how it applies to you. I mentioned that it's really applicable at scale, and I wanted to kind of showcase that in many ways. So Fitwel can be applied across a number of assets. So we have two different certifications, built certification and design certification. And it's really depending on where your building is in its life cycle. So built certification is for those that are existing and occupied. Design certification are for those projects that are in development or under construction still. Both certifications are exactly the same. They're valid for 3 years. You can get the plaques and decals and everything. The only thing that's different is, build certification can be achieved while the building is occupied and being currently operated. Design certification allows you to achieve certification prior to its completion. Design's been really useful for a lot of our users because it allows them to actually market the building to prospective tenants and residents before its completion and use that Fitwel certification as a way to actually enhance the building and use it as a tool for their leasing agents or others. The built certification really allows them to make the necessary updates while buildings are occupied without having to go through a major renovation or repositioning. Next slide, please. And Fitwel's applicable across a ton of different scorecards. So we have different workplace scorecards, whether you're looking at as a real estate owner and looking to certify kind of your core and shell, or if you're an individual tenant of a building looking to certify your own fit out. We also have scorecards for retail, so enclosed shopping centers and malls and lifestyle centers, multifamily residential. And actually this year as well, we launched a new scorecard for senior housing assets. This scorecard launched in February of 2020 or 2021, and it looks specifically at kind of various senior housing developments. It was piloted over the course of 2020 with several users, including Harrison Street, who's using it across several of their senior housing assets currently. It really allowed us to take a lot of information that was out there and really address some issues around health and well-being in senior housing, not just from the resident perspective, but from the employee perspective as well. So our latest scorecard is senior housing, really transformative, but scorecards for a number of different asset types at the building level. We also have two scorecards at the site level, community and commercial site. The community scorecard looks at kind of large master plan communities, mixed use, whereas commercial site looks at very similar ones as well, kind of large industrial parks or business parks. The thing that makes them different is that community is mixed use, with one of those uses being a residential component. So think of master plan communities with apartments or condos, things like that. Commercial site is more for large industrial parks, distribution centers, warehousing facilities, or large business parks that might be there. Commercial site just does not have a residential component to it. These scorecards launched in 2020, and we've seen some huge uptake in terms of the large developments, especially internationally. And another new and maybe one of our newest scorecards come out is the Fitwel Viral Response certification. This launched in September of 2020. And this certification is in direct response to kind of COVID-19. And it provides an annual third-party certification that looks at kind of operational and HR practices to mitigate the spread of infectious diseases within buildings. And I say infectious diseases intentionally because what COVID-19 was the catalyst to developing this certification. We took information and research from past endemics and pandemics like H1N1 and SARS and looked at research around influenza and the common cold to really make sure we could help build a playbook for companies that wasn't just going to answer the need of the acute need of COVID-19, but help them prepare a playbook that they could use for future infectious or respiratory infectious disease outbreaks, but also that could help use to manage kind of more traditional infectious disease we see, like the common cold and flu, that have an impact on employees and tenants alike. And this playbook is really designed, again, not to be a one-time use document, but something that could help companies really avoid, I think, the anxiety and uncertainty around March 2020, when we were, many companies and cities were told to go home and change operations, and many engineers and facility managers were left kind of unsure how to kind of manage their buildings. This provides a playbook you can go back to time and time again, pulling from some of those universal basics that we've learned from not only this current pandemic, but future outbreaks and a more common respiratory infectious diseases. And a few things make, there's a few different certifications out there, that have been developed in response to COVID-19, but this one is unique in a few ways. One, it's pretty flexible and scalable in its approach. We allow you to really kind of certify those operational and HR policies as a playbook, and then quickly scale them out to each of your individual buildings across your portfolio. That way, each building doesn't have to go through the process of kind of going through the review themselves. We do the review once at the company scale, and then each building can adopt into that playbook and show how they've successfully implemented it. It can be used across, again, a huge portfolio or a single asset. This certification actually does involve some minimum requirements. So as I mentioned, the building and site scorecards do not include those minimums. This one does, and that's really to make sure there's a consistent approach for residents and tenants and employees alike. Whether you go into a building that is Viral Response certified in Chicago or New York or LA or Dallas, you're going to know that they've committed to doing certain practices across the board that are going to help improve safety and resiliency, and reduce the risk and mitigate the risk of transmission of certain respiratory infectious diseases. It's fully integrated within our platform. We also provide comprehensive policies and protocols, which means that if you're an organization who's really starting from scratch, building out these playbooks in terms of cleaning protocols or indoor air quality policies for filtration and ventilation, we've provided kind of turnkey resources that you can use to help adopt for your individual buildings and for your portfolio. So you don't have to start from scratch, but you can actually start with using some of our templates that have been written and build off some of the research that supports this certification. And then finally, in my last slide, I believe, just wanted to show off some Fitwel champions and advisors. So again, we've grown, registrations have grown by 190% last year, but we've been supported by several large kind of real estate firms, ESG consulting firms like Gobi, as well as other kind of engineering and design firms out there, as well as several kind of corporate occupiers and Fortune 500 companies. So this is a small list of Fitwel champions and advisors. Fitwel champions are those companies that have committed to using Fitwel at scale. More information about that can be found at fitwel.org/champions. And if anyone's interested in learning more, they can go there or reach out to me directly. And then finally, the Fitwel platform, it's an incredibly unique platform that, again, allows companies to assess their buildings, certify, and grab that information. This is probably a great point for me to kind of pass the mic over to Sonia to talk more about the platform and her experience and how you all can use it as well.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, as a consultant, I'm working with property and development managers like Owen across a variety of different asset types that are looking to pursue Fitwel certification. And when beginning the certification process, I first like to start by asking why they're pursuing Fitwel. There might be something specific their occupants are asking for or the property is hoping to achieve. So maybe they want to ensure that the indoor air quality is safe in a post-COVID world, or maybe they are trying to increase building occupancy overall. But the great thing about the Fitwel portal is that it provides a really clear picture of how each strategy on the scorecard touches upon certain health impact categories, as Zach had talked about before. And this makes it really easy to select specific strategies that might pertain to your property's specific goals. So to give some insight into how the portal works, what it looks like, I've got an example profile here. So at the top left here, you'll see the name of the property, and then below the type of scorecard that they're working with. So this one in particular is a multifamily residential building. And then at the bottom left here, you'll see a list of all of the categories for this specific scorecard. So this will be things like location, building access, outdoor spaces, and so forth. And then within each of these tabs it will provide you with all of the strategies within that specific category. So this is where you can go in and actually select which strategies you would like to pursue and upload any compliance documentation as necessary. And then on the right-hand side here, they have a nice figure showing how many of those health impact categories this specific category is touching upon. As well as at the top of the profile here, there's a nice figure as well showing across all of the strategies that you're pursuing within your project, what percentage of those strategies is achieving any of those health impact categories. So again, a nice way to kind of target strategies that are pertaining to your project specific goals. Also, it might highlight areas where your property is excelling in health impact categories that you may not have even been initially aware of. The majority of these strategies are meant to be relatively easy to implement. I found that they're simply geared at making the healthier option the easiest and most accessible option to your occupants. So you might be surprised with a few simple changes, how many strategies can actually be achieved and how much of an impact that can actually have. And then to just go into one of the strategies a little more in depth here, you can see the strategy number here, exactly how many points it's worth, and then a list of all of the requirements for the strategy in particular, and then any requirements for the compliance documentation as well. Also, if you're ever curious, how any of these strategies is pertaining to building health and wellness, they provide the rationale and sample evidence on each of the strategies in the profile, so that'll provide that information for you as well. And then once all of the documentation has been uploaded, submitted, and Fitwel has reviewed your certification, you will receive a scorecard summary that looks something like this, outlining exactly how many points were earned, the star rating, as well as all of the strategies that were awarded credit for, and then exactly how those strategies are connecting to health and wellness. So as you can see, the portal itself is quite user-friendly. It provides really all the information that you might need on all of the strategies within your scorecard, and it makes it easy to kind of pick and choose strategies that are best suited to your specific project. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Owen to talk about his experience going through the certification process for 2 different buildings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Zach. Thanks to Gobi for having me today. We'll touch on a lot of the points that both of the other panelists kind of went over before and sort of apply them to a project that Lendlease has been working on here in the city of Chicago. So what you're seeing now on your screen is a site plan for South Bank, which is a 7-acre master plan development located in the South Loop of Chicago, bounded by Harrison Street and Wells Street. The 2 buildings we'll be focusing on today are the Cooper, you can see there as a 29-story multifamily residential, as well as the Reed, which is a 41-story hybrid residential building with 4 rent apartments on the lower floors and then 4 sale condominiums on the upper floors. Just to provide a little bit more context on the site here, you can see we have a lovely green space here that we refer fondly to as South Bank Park, which also consists of a recently installed Riverwalk that connects the site up to Harrison Street and then beyond up until Chicago's Loop. So that gives a little context on the site. We'll move on and provide a little bit of history here. You can see here's a photo of South Bank Park. This is the amphitheater of South Bank Park and the Riverwalk facing north towards Chicago's Loop. You can see the Willis Tower there. For native Chicagoans like myself, we'll always know it as the Sears Tower, no matter whose name is on the door. But just some fun history on this site here before we really dive into the certification process. South Bank was formerly a rail yard that terminated into what was Chicago's Grand Central Station, which was the terminus for the Baltimore and Ohio railroads. Grand Central Station was abandoned and demolished in the mid-1970s, and the site sat vacant thereafter for a few decades. as a brownfield until Lend-Lease kind of came along, saw the promise that this site has, some of the connectivity, which we'll get into a little bit later as it relates to the strategies, and felt that this was a worthy investment to really transform a brownfield into a vibrant, healthy, sustainable community. So one of the last things I'll mention here as we look at this photo, one of my favorite stories here, those limestone blocks that you can see that comprise our amphitheater there were actually the old foundations to Chicago's Grand Central Station. When we were sort of grading this site, we ran into these limestone blocks and they were so perfect that we thought that we had to use them, and such we stored them and constructed this amphitheater. So that's a little bit about South Bank and South Bank Park. And next, we'll get into the Cooper. Change our slide here. So you can see the Cooper up on the center left here. As I mentioned earlier, is our existing 29-story multifamily residential structure here, and we came into the Cooper in terms of Fitwel after this property was constructed and open and occupied, which was an interesting starting place for us in the context of we are in the process of building the Cooper's sister property, which will be called the Reed. We'll touch on that a little bit later. That'll be directly to the right of this site here. So the Cooper, Lend-Lease sustainability is always at front of mind, and we're constantly trying to think about how we can build structures that are not only kind to the planet but also to the residents who call them home. So Fitwel felt like a really natural fit to us to sort of extend our sustainability certification efforts beyond the built environment, which you can kind of think of as LEED, into the operational environment, which is Fitwel in this circumstance. So we have a fabulous team in place. The Cooper is managed by Bizzuto, which, as Zach mentioned earlier, is one of the Fitwel champions. So they were familiar with this program. They were excellent partners. We went through this certification process with Gobi as well. Sonia in particular are also excellent partners on this effort. And really what we were doing is, as we were going through the scorecard, we were seeing things that we were doing well, but also finding areas that we could do better in, which I think is really the value add from this outcome, from this exercise, is to understand the gaps or the holes in your operational strategy that can be plugged up, so to speak, to make it a healthier building. So some of those areas that we looked at here in terms of the Cooper was some operational strategies, including pest management, indoor air quality, sort of vending architecture, availability to water fountains and clean drinking water, availability of fitness centers, and then of course availability and access, proximity to green space, which you can kind of see here illustrated, the South Bank Riverwalk winding its way down from Harrison Street over to the Cooper. So we were blessed with a terrific site for this. So a lot of the strategies that were in place really were fairly easy for us in the context of a downtown development that has great access to public transit and sort of unique to South Bank here, the green space that we are so lucky to have in South Bank Park. So throughout this certification process, we sort of started on the Cooper, which is our existing building, which informed us of what we're doing well right now, but also, as I touched on earlier, what we could do better. And this is where this process really kind of kicked into overdrive and really gave us a ton of value in terms of taking this built certification at the Cooper and then applying the lessons learned that we sort of gleaned from running through the scorecard to the Reed. So I will flip to our next slide here. As you can see, the Reed is the building on the right. This is currently under construction. So if you're on Chicago, it might be a little bit chilly to take one of our famous architectural boat cruises down on the Chicago River. But if you do, I encourage you to check out the Reed. So we are under construction here, but while we were going through this process, we had the opportunity to, implement some of those lessons learned from our build certification at the Cooper and apply those to the Reed to really make this, a healthier building than we had, originally drawn up in the early phases of pre-development. And I'll touch on, one of the most important strategies that we were, unable to apply to the Cooper, but we're able to apply to the Reed, is the indoor air quality strategy, which is, I think Zach touched on earlier, really front of mind at a lot of tenants and homeowners' minds right now in this sort of, current pandemic world that we live in. So that's something that, we intend to market quite heavily as, a benefit, or really, I think of it as an amenity to these buildings' residents for both renters and condominium purchasers. So, going throughout this whole process, I'll speak a little bit to, some of the impetus here and take a high-level step back, on Lendlease's general sustainability philosophy. We work with a institutional investor partner here called Aware Super, which is an Australian superannuation fund. And we are participants in what's called the America's Residential Partnership. For that, we have some lofty sustainability goals that I'm very proud to sort of tout, which is called Mission Zero, which is seeking to be net zero carbon in scopes 1 and 2 as of this year, 2021, and we're seeking net zero carbon absolute by 2040. So this really dovetails in to our overall sustainability strategy here through that America's Residential Partnership. And part of that sustainability strategy really is, making sure that our efforts are, verified, certified by third parties, in this case, Fitwel, and then also recognized in a larger context, which is the GRESB ranking. What I can say is that the third-party certifications do weight quite heavily in GRESB, and that was one of the major impetus is for us pursuing our Fitwel certification here in Chicago at both the Cooper and the Reed and beyond. I'll also note that we are employing Fitwel certification at several other projects across the Chicagoland area in conjunction with Gobi. So this really kind of speaks to what our business model here is as part of the America's Residential Partnership, which is really a build to core model. Lendlease builds our assets with the intent of holding them with our capital partners for quite some time, as opposed to sort of a merchant developer sort of arrangement in which we build and sell, get out. So for us, it's absolutely essential that not only are our buildings built to a high standard of sustainability, but also that they operate to that same high standard of sustainability, so that our residents get the benefits that we have intended for them. And this is a great way to really, put those programs in place along with the property management team to ensure that those goals are met throughout the life of the building, which is incredibly important to us. A few other points I'll touch on here that Zach mentioned earlier is that a lot of these strategies that we have implemented at the Reed and have sort of documented at the Cooper are extremely low to no cost. A lot of this is really sort of sweat equity, I'd like to call it, and a little bit of discipline in terms of how your properties are operated, which is, terrific. It's great to be able to add this kind of value, especially from a marketing perspective, without spending significant dollars. That was a big draw for us to the Fitwel certification as well. Let's see. We'll talk a little bit, before we wrap up, in terms of, how we're looking to apply this to the future. Lendlease here in Chicago, we do develop multifamily residential. We also develop other asset classes as well. And I think one of the things that's fantastic with Fitwel is that flexibility, is that it is not just a multifamily residential certification. can also apply to a variety of other commercial assets. That appealed to us very much, in that we could have sort of a holistic certification system that we could apply to our entire portfolio and be able to benchmark off of our various properties here. So I think that's about it on South Bank, but welcome to answer any questions.
Yeah, Owen, I just want to say it was really cool to work on the Cooper and the Reed as unique projects, just given, to reiterate what you had said, one having already been built and one being in the design phase. I think it's very cool to see, maybe within the timeline of the project, you might not have been able to implement all the strategies with the Cooper, but having the scorecard kind of serve as a roadmap for the Reed, for all of their policies and programming going forth. I think that's a really, really cool way, and yeah, a fun project to work on. So yeah, I think we have a couple of minutes here to answer a few questions. Let's see, I'll look in here. So we've got one: how are tenants demanding and engaging on Fitwel initiatives?
Yeah, let me jump in there for that one. So a lot of the demand, I think, for healthy buildings is being driven by tenants. It was one of the key findings we found in the investor consensus report that I presented on earlier. And tenants can play kind of multiple roles in helping companies achieve certification, and thinking really about corporate office space right now. So tenants can achieve their own certification for their own fit outs, but oftentimes we find that the landlords are building out certain spaces with tenants in mind. So they're thinking about the amenities they're providing, they're thinking about the policies and the management of their buildings. And then they're using that to kind of certify on what we call our base building scorecard, which, if you're familiar with LEED, is kind of akin to our core and shell, their core and shell. But the great thing about that scorecard is that it actually allows the real estate owners and operators to then transfer some of those strategies over to the tenants. So tenants in those buildings aren't starting from 0, they might be starting from 10, 20, even 30 points. And then they're able just to focus on some of the fit out within their own space. So Fitwel and the platform do allow for that kind of coordination between the real estate owners and the tenants themselves. But really the demand is, I think, coming from the fact that we just have much more educated and sophisticated tenants now, who are asking about things like indoor air quality testing and monitoring, what type of ventilation systems are used. I feel like MERV 13 is now a household word, where before it was, a very kind of weird acronym that people weren't sure of. But they're asking about cleaning protocols, and it really comes down to that, the office spaces that we're seeing and the ones that tenants are demanding are really shaped by what experience can they provide people, in terms of, are they able to kind of access things like healthy food? Are there amenity spaces that meet their needs, like exercise rooms or quiet rooms? Do they have access to things like transportation, outdoor spaces? And that demand is really being heard by many people, and developers, whether they're kind of retrofitting current buildings or they're changing floors to be just purely amenity spaces, or if they've got buildings that are in construction, they're using Fitwel to really answer that demand, because many markets, we might still be seeing some high vacancy rates, and they're using that as a tool to actually communicate with tenants and communicate with the brokers and others at companies like Colliers or CBRE or JLL, who are looking for spaces that have that type of certification. So tenant demand, I think, is being heard and is really strong in the real estate industry right now. I think their demands are probably weighted more than they have been in quite some time, and the real estate community is really responding in a positive way and saying we're happy to do these things, because we know it's going to create the experience tenants are asking for. But we also know there's going to be kind of it's good for business, and it's good for our bottom line to be focused on investing on these type of updates and efficiencies.
Absolutely, Zach. Maybe I can chip in a couple of thoughts from the more residential perspective. Really, one of the things that's important to Lendlease and is reflected in the Fitwel scorecard is listening to our residents. That really is a strategy in terms of taking surveys. universally across the board in our residential buildings, we see that health and well-being is a huge concern and a huge value driver for our business. So part of that is really understanding what do our residents want, and we see that all the time, that it mirrors really some of the strategies that Fitwel, kind of champions, which is access to green space, access to amenities, healthy air quality. So we kind of see this in practice, some of those strategies, kind of delivering the value through our resident feedback, which is so important to us to understand, how our residents feel safe, feel welcome, and feel at home in our buildings. So I echo that the tenant demand has never been higher for these types of initiatives.
Absolutely.
I've got a follow-up question to that. Maybe Zach or Owen, you can answer this. Is demand for Fitwel initiatives driven more by workplace experience or employees or ESG goals, do you find?
Owen, why don't you start, and I'll add context at the end.
Sure. That's a great question, and I'll try to give an answer. It is both, 100%. From Lendlease's perspective, for us, this is something that that we do willingly and happily for our residents, but also from an investor perspective, this really is at the top of mind. I spoke a little bit about our investment vehicle, which is the America's Residential Partnership, where these type of sustainability goals, particularly on the operating side, are front of mind, and real sort of contractual obligations that we are performing. So it really comes from both sources. But I think at the end of the day, it's great to have the recognition that you get in something like a GRESB rating or a 2-star certification. But at the end of the day, what's important to us is the residents in our communities living healthier and happier lives, which I think this is a really effective tool to help achieve that.
Yeah, I'll agree with Owen. It's certainly both. And I think that the real estate industry is seeing that both are, it's almost the perfect storm, that many real estate owners or operators are getting the pressure for healthy buildings from their investors, or from kind of the top down, saying, look, we're looking at your ESG strategy, and they're using Fitwel as a way to kind of strengthen those S metrics. One of those findings in that report is that, there are a lot of ways to define ESG right now, and a lot of ways that companies are particularly defining S. I think the E and the G, the environment and the governance, have always been a little bit stronger and more well defined, but S has been a little bit looser across the board. Healthy buildings are certainly, and health and well-being in general are certainly a way to kind of strengthen that. So a lot of our organizations in the real estate world are looking at Fitwel or other healthy buildings and saying, we can use this information and this data to really strengthen that and strengthen our reporting, because it's a must do these days compared to a nice to have. But then also, tenant demand is incredibly strong when we look at the performance of buildings. So whether it's, you're looking at your occupancy rates, or funds that, we're hoping to stabilize, or properties that you're hoping to stabilize, listening to those tenants and responding accordingly, as Owen mentioned, is super important and really front of mind right now. As many tenants that we had in the past, their occupancy or how much space they're leasing is no longer guaranteed, as many people continue to think about hybrid workspaces or what experience they want for their employees or tenants moving forward.
Thank you both. Okay, we've got another question here. Are there any specific asset types or sectors performing especially well when it comes to adopting Fitwel and prioritizing health and wellness?
So Fitwel's flagship, scorecards are in the office space. So we've seen a lot of the commercial office owners and investors really come forward, and that's probably been our strongest performing kind of asset type to date. Although multifamily has been quickly rising. The multifamily scorecard came out in 2018, and it's really exploded over the last 2 years in terms of one of our kind of leading and most valuable certifications. I'd say other areas that are quickly growing, the commercial site scorecard and its use across the industrial development community. We're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of growth, whether it be for kind of warehousing and manufacturing facilities or even data centers that are really rethinking the way that they think about how they're developing and building out and operating these spaces. And then senior housing and student housing, again, really kind of growing rapidly, especially since senior housing launched earlier this year, really allowing us to kind of participate in that community. That's one area where I think the senior housing, particularly where the pandemic, the effects were felt pretty well or strongly, and the demand for that scorecard was kind of omnipresent as we were developing it, and it's great to see that so many users have really adopted it and found it to be useful as they think about the new experience, the new operations, and of those spaces.
Yeah, in my experience, I've seen a lot of commercial buildings, a lot of multi-tenant based buildings, coming forward and trying to achieve a Fitwel certification. Just given the past year, everyone is mostly working from home, so a lot of these buildings are trying to engage in their occupants, trying to bring them back into the office, ensure that it is safe, and that they have something to offer within that building for them. So definitely something that I've seen a lot more of.
And I'll add to that, and in this case with some of Owen's buildings, the design certification has also rapidly grown. We're seeing a lot more companies, whether it be office or residential, using the Fitwel standard as a way to plan these projects and plan these properties ahead of time. And as Owen mentioned, it's a way to reduce the cost of actually implementing a certification. I love how you put it, Owen, with kind of sweat equity and discipline, but being able to actually think about from the very early design stages, what are the things we're going to provide on site? What are the things we're going to do? And put that into kind of their design standards. So every project moving forward that's ground up or new construction or even a major renovation or repositioning, they know exactly what's going to happen, which really helps to reduce their cost and reduce the cost of implementation of Fitwel. So we're seeing a real rise in new construction, adopting Fitwel across the board and utilizing that tool.
Okay, we've got one more question here. How has COVID-19 changed how companies are approaching healthy buildings?
I'll jump in and just say, I think that healthy buildings are no longer a nice to have. They're no longer the nice addition to sustainability. They're no longer the gift with purchase in many ways, but really these are must-have strategies, and they are really providing the kind of texture and really strengthening current ESG and sustainability initiatives. So if anything, COVID has led to just more more educated tenants and residents who are demanding more. It's led to investors who see the higher value and the writing on the wall around investing in ESG and having funds tied to ESG. And I think those things are here to stay. And COVID has, if a company wasn't doing it before, it has certainly made them think more about it. And if they were just scratching the surface, they're diving in. And if a company was kind of slowly rolling out healthy building certifications and practices, it certainly accelerated that rollout. Because they want to stay in front of it. They want to make sure that they are seen as a leader in the space and someone who's really taking the efforts and the desires and needs of tenants and investors and residents alike to heart and kind of delivering on those promises.
Absolutely. I'll build on a little bit of what Zach said there. COVID has had such a dramatic impact and is really, I think, from a corporate organizational all the way down to the personal level, rethinking about our relationship to the built environment as many workplaces change into hybrid work environments. It changes the way that residents in our communities think of their home. Your home is no longer, just a place to keep your bed and sleep. Your home can also be your office. Whereas the need for healthy buildings in the commercial space is there, it's also it accelerated that desire and demand on the residential side because people are spending so much more time at home, and then you realize a little bit of simultaneously the comforts that your home offers, but as well as the comforts that the corporate office place offers, and how can we make those two things kind of come together for what's going to be the new normal post-pandemic. And I think those strategies that Fitwel sort of espouses are so essential for that, to create that sort of work-life balance that I think all of us are striving for. Whether you're at home for a couple of days a week, remote working permanently, or in the office, it's just so much at the front of everybody's mind right now of how to stay happy and healthy, and have your career and have a happy household.
Thank you both. I believe those are all the questions that we have for today. So I just want to wrap it up here. I want to thank all of our listeners and participants for engaging with us today, and for our two panelists, Zach Flora and Owen Hull. Yeah, thank you for participating.
Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, Gobi.
Thanks, Sonia. My pleasure.